What if a simple night out, basketball, snacks, and a drive home, ended not just in disappearance, but in something far more confusing, a trail that leads into the mountains and then breaks apart into fragments of a story that never fully fits together? This is not a case of a quick disappearance. It is a case where the deeper you go, the less sense it makes. 5 men left home on a winter evening in 1978 in Northern California, and somehow, by the end of the night, they drifted off course into one of the most baffling survival mysteries ever recorded. And what happened next still divides investigators, families, and anyone who has ever tried to piece it together. It began on February 24th in Yuba City, California. 5 friends, Jack Madruga, William Sterling, Theodore Ted Wire, Jack Hewitt, and Gary Mathias, were preparing for what should have been a normal Friday night. They were known locally as the Boys, a close group who shared not just friendship, but a place in the Yuba City Gateway program, a rehabilitative community helping men with intellectual disabilities and mental health challenges build structure in their lives. That night, they were excited. They had tickets to a college basketball game in Chico, a simple outing, a break from routine, something to look forward to. Jack Madruga, quiet and responsible, owned the car they would use, a 1969 Mercury Montego. William Sterling was his closest friend, deeply religious and calm. Ted Wire was older, sometimes impulsive, often dependent on his friends. Jack Hewitt was quiet, slow to react, and usually followed others. And Gary Mathias stood apart. Unlike the others, he had no intellectual disability, but he did struggle with severe schizophrenia. He had been in and out of the military and treatment programs, but at the time, he was reportedly stable. Together, they formed a group that functioned best as a unit. Separate, they struggled, but together they were just 5 friends heading out for a game. They left in the early evening, drove to Chico, watched the game, and even stopped afterward for snacks at a small convenience store. Nothing about their behavior stood out. Nothing suggested they were heading toward disaster. But on the drive home, something changed. Instead of taking the normal route back to Yuba City, the car went off course. Rather than staying on Highway 99 or Highway 70, the Mercury Montego turned onto the Oroville-Quincy Highway, a remote, winding road that leads away from towns and deeper into the mountains. No one knows for sure why. Some believe it was a wrong turn. Others suggest confusion, misreading signs, or simply trusting the wrong direction in the dark. Whatever the reason, the decision pulled them away from safety and toward isolation. The road climbed higher. The night grew colder. Snow lined the edges. Eventually, the paved road ended. They continued onto a dirt track. And then, the car stopped moving. It was stuck in snow deep in the Plumas National Forest region. They were now miles from help in freezing conditions with no clear way back. And this is where the story becomes strange. At some point after getting stuck, all 5 men left the car. That decision alone has puzzled investigators for decades. The vehicle, while stuck, was not buried or destroyed. In similar conditions, 5 able-bodied men could have likely worked together to free it, or at least remain inside for shelter. Instead, they walked away and into the dark forest. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the same region, another man, Joseph Shones, was also stranded that night. He later reported seeing unusual activity, headlights, figures walking in the distance, and moments where sound and movement seemed to start and stop without explanation. But his account was inconsistent over time, making it difficult to separate fact from confusion or misinterpretation. Still, it adds another layer to the mystery. Multiple people in the same remote area, all experiencing something unusual on the same night. Back in Yuba City, concern began to grow. The men were expected home. It was unlike them to disappear without contact. Families began calling authorities, but there was no immediate sign of where they went. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Winter storms swept through the mountains, burying any possible trail under snow. Search efforts became dangerous. At times, rescuers themselves struggled in the same terrain they were trying to search. Eventually, authorities were forced to pause the operation until conditions improved. By then, the mountains had swallowed nearly all trace of the 5 men. Then, months later in June, something finally broke the silence. A group of motorcyclists discovered an abandoned Forest Service trailer in a remote campground near Bucks Lake. Inside, the air was heavy. Something was wrong immediately. And then they found a body. It was Ted Wire. He was inside the trailer, badly deteriorated, severely underweight, and wrapped in bedding. His feet showed signs of extreme frostbite. He had survived for a time inside the structure, but eventually died from exposure and starvation. But what made the discovery even more confusing was what was inside the trailer. Canned food, a heat source, shelter, supplies, enough to survive, and yet most of it had barely been used. The question was immediate and disturbing. If he had access to survival resources, why didn't he use them properly? Search teams returned to the area, and soon more remains were found. William Sterling and Jack Madruga were discovered several miles away. Their conditions suggested exhaustion, exposure, and disorientation. One had been partially scavenged by wildlife. The other was found scattered nearby, indicating he had likely collapsed in the harsh terrain. Not long after, clothing and remains linked to Jack Hewitt were also discovered. But Gary Mathias was never found. He simply vanished into the mountains. No confirmed remains, no clear trace, nothing that definitively explained his final movements. This is where theories begin to form, but none fully solve the case. One idea suggests a simple accident, a wrong turn, a stuck car, panic in the cold, and poor decisions made under stress. From there, confusion could have led the group deeper into the forest instead of towards safety. Another theory focuses on survival behavior. Maybe they became disoriented, separated, or followed terrain that felt safer but wasn't. Then there is the more controversial angle involving Gary Mathias. Some believe his mental health history and possible influence over the group may have played a role in the initial detour, but there is no solid evidence that he led them into danger or that anything intentional occurred. And then there's the biggest question of all. Why leave a working vehicle? Why abandon shelter in freezing conditions? Why ignore food and survival supplies that could have saved them? Some believe they may have misunderstood their surroundings entirely. Others suggest panic, fear, or even collective confusion under extreme stress. Hypothermia itself can cause poor decision-making, hallucinations, and irrational movement, turning survival instincts against the person experiencing them. In that state, even simple decisions can become fatal mistakes. The final stretch of the story is silence. Gary Mathias disappears completely into that silence. No confirmed sightings, no recovered remains, no closure, just an empty mountain range that slowly returned to normal, as if nothing had happened at all. The Yuba County Five remain one of the most disturbing survival mysteries in American history, not because of what is known, but because of what isn't. A car that left the road for reasons no one fully agrees on, 5 men who walked away from safety, a trailer that could have saved them but didn't, and a final outcome that still raises more questions than answers. Even today, one question lingers louder than the rest. How does a group of 5 friends go into the mountains and never find their way back?